Hi all, I have an absolutely fascinating and instructive game to show you from the GRENKE Chess Classic Round 7. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave playing with the white pieces against Fabiano Caruana. So this is the man of the moment, Caruana. He's qualified to play Magnus Carlsen and might possibly become our next future world champion if he can defeat Magnus Carlsen. Let's see this game. So c4 from MVL for short, e5. Knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6. So funny enough, this is called the four knights variation. G3 of the English opening. G3, bishop b4, bishop g2. Both sides now castle. E4, knight g5. This is pretty standard stuff so far. Black takes, b takes, rook e8. Now here usually f3 is played, and there's even been this variation. It was in a Kasparov against Karpov World Chess Championship game, which is actually one of my favourite games of Anatoly Karpov defeating Kasparov with the white pieces, because it continued very interestingly with e3, and I thought black can sometimes get a kind of pawn which dislocates the white position, and there's a really interesting game you should check out if you haven't already. I'll give you a link in the description. So that was actually, it's a very it's the most popular move, basically, f3, and it seems pretty logical. The knight on the 5th rank wants to come back, and this pawn does seem a bit cheeky, so challenging it seems to be a very logical move as well, as well trodden. But in this game we get a slightly rarer bird move, queen c2, and even though yeah, it looks good to hit the pawn, and this might seem a bit dangerous what black does, d5, because it seems to be going straight into a pin after c takes, and also undoubling the pawn. So you might think this is a bit mad as well. Why would black want to undouble the pawns? Well, it's to protect the e4 pawn. So okay, white's got the bishop pair, but look at this knight, it's kind of misplaced, and it's hit here now by the queen. But white wants to hit this pawn as well, so protecting the knight and also exploiting the pin. But here, this is really quite interesting now. What can black do? Technically, you might think this little trick to hit the white queen, but it falls to bishop takes d5, because f7 is important here. After d takes, bishop takes f7 check, and white's got a big advantage. So the pawn, for the moment, it remains pinned and can't move, so it's pinned to the queen, but bishop f5 is played. Now although white does have the bishop pair, this is a very important point to challenge in the center, and it's often, if you control the center, you've got access to the opponent's king, and I believe there's something quite vividly demonstrated in this game, that from this central point there's implications for white's king safety almost immediately. And I have to say that I didn't really understand the full impact of the implications for white's king, so I want to try and spell those out pretty shortly. White plays bishop f4, which seems to attack the c7 pawn, as though black's going to do something about that. It might be a good alternative to play rook b1. So rook b1 hits b7 instead of c7, basically. So for example, h6, this continuation would seem, if we go into this, it seems okay that white's getting b7 after and hitting c7, and it's splitting the pawns very importantly as well. So white should be okay in that continuation. So rook b1 seems plausible here as well, so bishop f4. Taking here wouldn't seem to give white too much, because black is, because then it's sort of fragmenting white's pawn chain even further, actually, isolate pawn there and there. So we see this move bishop f4. Now, actually, yeah, okay, bishop f4, h6 is played, knight takes e4, knight takes e4, and white could consider just recapturing here, but he's got that pin against the queen, which he tries to celebrate a little bit longer. White plays queen b2, so keeping that pin in place. If white took on e4 here, this position actually should be okay, just about okay for white. Black's got no real problems there, so that should be okay. So queen b2. Another alternative is bishop. Sorry, d takes e4, bishop takes e4, rook ad1. Instead of rook ad1, bishop takes e4. Let's have a look at this. Queen takes, rook takes, bishop takes c7. This position. Black's got a small edge there. You can see that the pawn's kind of fragmented. Black's pretty active. For example, this position, yeah, it's already pretty good for black, basically. So anyway, queen b2 was played, and now we see b6. So that protects, of course, that b7 pawn. Now, it seems as though, well, white could be tempted to take on c7. I'm not sure black's bothered about that. If white took on c7, knight a5, black's getting a lot of piece activity here and can lock down the position via c4 perhaps. So queen c4, looking forward to holding white down with that c4 square. It looks to be an even position, so white's not that interested in doing that here, taking that pawn. White plays rook fd1. And we see now queen c5, already an implication for white's king safety, hitting f2. So this knight should be eliminated now. We see d takes, bishop takes. And here, white could play, it seems, just the simple looking, taking, and then go for the rook on the 7th. And this position would seem an even position. It's no big deal for white, but it shouldn't be losing for white either. It shouldn't be losing either. Okay, but going back to the game now. In the game, we have the move bishop f1. And this is actually what makes the game particularly interesting to me, just from an instructive point of view, from my own chess development generally, is that I thought this game was just intuitively played here, that black just visually wants to double up rooks now. So black plays rook e7. But there's a whole host of implications coming up for white's king safety, which shows that in chess, you know, when you look at a master game, it's not just his pieces look good. I mean, it does also protect the pawn anyway. But this plan actually looks good, but it has a lot of implications for king safety, which I want to try and show now. But let's go to the game continuation after rook e7, which prepares the double rooks, a4. So yeah, it looks as though this is just positional, you know, orientated. Rook a e8. So at the moment, yeah, black's pieces all look pretty fantastic with a nice bishop in the center. But here is where things get super aggressive all of a sudden. You see that the bishop is actually cutting off some of the king escape squares. And you might not think that's a big deal, but actually I think if you're an attacking player, there should be an automatic kind of logic to this. That if you've got some escape squares cut, you can do something with this to almost like quite rapidly build up a mating net, potentially. And we see that black already has some mating implications in mind with his very next move, very aggressive move here. Can you see what black plays in this position? And I'll try and show why this can be part of a construction for already built-in mating nets. Black to play here, what would you play with the black pieces? So it's literally, you can look at this position, or even this game, if you're looking at master games and think, oh, the pieces look nice, but there's something quite sinister about this bishop cutting across the king here. Black plays g5. Things get very, very concrete now with this forcing move. This was something Alexander Kotov in Think Like a Grandmaster mentioned, that he had a kind of waffly style of play, maybe looking for downside of the opponent's position, sometimes intuitively, but he added a whole concreteness to his play because he found that opponents, like after the game, they'd seen a lot more concrete variations which really show other downsides of stuff. And here, this is the start of a very concrete idea. g5. Here, bishop d2 is played. You might think what would be thinking of bishop e3. Bishop e3. Let's have a look at bishop e3. Bishop d2 looks maybe a little bit strange to you. On bishop e3 there is a concrete move here which celebrates and builds on the bishop cutting across some escape squares. What would you play in this position? And why? How can you build on the bishop cutting escape squares? There's a very strong continuation here with queen f5. I'll give you an example. Rook a1, and what would be the point? If this is a token move, rook a1, what could black do which is really strong already in this position and close to absolutely winning with a knockout blow now? Okay, knight e5 with the idea of, just put it on the board, the token move. What would black play in this position? Knight f3 check, and now all of a sudden we got a battery of the bishop and queen, threatening queen h1 mate, and it's like decisive. It would be a knockout blow. So this is why black's pieces don't just look pretty. There's quite concrete stuff going on in this position, which is creating these rather peculiar moves that you might think, why bishop d2, why not bishop e3? So you start to see this echo of this very, very concrete stuff. Here, by the way, if we look at this position, there might have been c4. Now here, c5, knight f3 check. It's just too scary though. Knight d2 check. This is far too scary. This sort of stuff, with black ending up being much better in any case in that line. So anyway, we'll go to the game continuation. g5, very concrete move all of a sudden. Bishop d2, very concrete and forcing. Bishop d2, now queen f5. You can see some of the concrete stuff is still relevant here. Knight e5 to f3. If black had another two moves, this bishop is going to weave a mating net. And we see this move in response maybe to this kind of stuff. We see f3. So if white doesn't do anything about the dangers which are coming here, knight e5 to f3, let's say a5, knight e5 again. So knight f3 is coming in with a big, it's a big threat, knight f3 here. And this position, for example, is absolutely destructive. Knight takes h2 check, queen takes f2 check, and this is just like mating. For example, like this, rook e3. And it's just mating. So you can see it's not that the position just looks pretty. You can add to that effective as well. If you start looking at the concrete stuff here, it's pretty effective as well, not just looking pretty. So f3, and this looks like a really ugly move to play. It weakens the diagonal. For example, black plays this check, and again, this is really quite terrible for white, this position. And you can see why it's so terrible after king g2. There's very, very concrete stuff going on behind the scenes. In the game, king h1, and you might think, well, this was a positional game. And you might think bishop d5, the rooks look nice and there's pressure on white's position, and you might not think anything of it. But when you analyse this game and you see the horror of king g2, guess what the concrete horrors are in this position if king g2? Which shows that the black rooks are not just pretty, they're pretty effective. Just add the word effective. Once you see the concrete stuff, add the word effective to your thinking. What does black play here if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, which is really quite crushing. Okay, bishop takes f3, yeah, the rooks can infiltrate with great effect to the 7th rank because they're doubled here. So if e takes, the rooks can crash through. Rook e2 check. Once the rook's on the 7th, mating is not so far away after queen f2. There's a nasty pin against the bishop, threatening mate on h2, which is difficult really to stop. It's impossible to stop here. So that shows some of the horrors now in this position. And if king takes, there's a magnificent attacking idea here, I have to say. I mean, if you don't see the behind the scenes stuff here of this game, you'd think black just played kind of simple positional chess. But really the teeth is really shown, the effectiveness of this simple positional chess is really shown here. Guess what black can play here, which is a magnificent attacking idea. If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video. Okay. Can take escape squares with queen g1, taking the retreats out. And this is going to be weaving a really vicious attack. For example, queen b5, rook e3 check, the concrete stuff. I think this is what Kotov was saying, that he sharpened himself up by, you know, working through tactical exercises and seeing what he missed. He became more and more concrete in his thinking. And I believe that added another concrete dimension to how he's looking at the downsides, in particular, of the opponent's positions. So here we can see that the king's safety is such a major factor. Now, knight e5 check, for example, queen takes h2 check. Yeah, you can't just judge this game from a simple positional perspective when this sort of stuff is clearly behind the scenes. And this was kind of, yeah, it's just such a strong position that even king g2, it just loses. Even here, though, after king h1, black did play a simple positional move, which, you know, if you do have calculation flaws, you're not going to regret them. Black played this bishop d5. Again, concretely, though, it seems, especially with computers, we can easily prove this now. Concretely, black has bishop takes f3, very concrete continuation. Instead, because after e takes, there's a nasty pin here after queen f2, but this does require quite sophisticated calculation. Bishop g2, rook e2, hitting the 7th rank. It's at least going to pick up that bishop if black wants, but there's even worse with knight e5, just keeping that pin. But here we're going into, you know, requiring significant calculations and being very relaxed about the pin from almost a strategic point of view, not exploiting the pin until even further damage is done. So here, black's wanting to leave that pin. This is the technically best approach, and play for knight f2 to win the exchange. So for example, like this is just brilliant for black anyway, if white wants to relieve the pin. But what else does white do in this very tricky position? If queen c1, relieving the pin, knight d3, knight f2 check, here this is formidable in any case, because rook e1, if the bishop stops guarding e1. But who's going to calculate all of this? No, I don't think Kotov either. I think this concrete stuff is computer level calculation here now. So anyway, we have a simple positional move which has got big advantages. If you slip in your calculations, you've still got a great position. But it's just funny what's behind the scenes of this particular game. So bishop e1 guards against some stuff like queen f2 in particular. Here, if white, for example, just to show the power of this, if a5, this is still on, rook takes e2, infiltrating now, with queen f2 is on the cards. And if rook f1 to parry queen f2, leaving that horrendous pin, knight e5, this position is just horrible. Knight takes f3. It's pretty devastating, isn't it? Look, threatening rook takes h2. So you can see there's a ton of concrete stuff going on again. So bishop e1, white just seems to have played far too many pawn moves. And now bishop c4, not leaving too many options for white here, which don't look too absolutely depressing. I think if rook d2, there's a nasty pin this way, so maybe something like even like knight e5, knight takes f3 is on the cards. You can see the double rooks are just punting for e1 here. So anyway, we see white playing the tactical response e4, just temporarily giving up the bishop. But Caruana here is switching into a different, more relaxed approach. He's not totally like depressed. He's not going to mate the white king here. He just plays queen c4 and just grabs a pawn. And there's very little compensation for that pawn. It basically means all the endgames are starting to be like winning for black after taking this pawn. But what's worse, it's not just that pawn actually. This pawn structure here is quite unstable. It can be undermined with later g4. So g4 is on the cards as well. That g5 move, yeah, it's got big perks to it. c4, knight e5, hitting f3. Bishop d4, protecting f3 for a moment. And now we have this undermining move G4. Yeah, the structure is absolutely melting down after this, white's pawn structure, and the queen is on the light square ready to attack on that diagonal. Also, you know, knight d3 concretely, if queen c2, this endgame is just very good for black, where even g4 can be played anyway with a big advantage. So there's a lot of roads to Rome here, but we see g4 immediately. Here, look at this structure, it's just absolutely wrecked. Queen d7. So that G pawn is not going anywhere. Black's pretty relaxed about this. Queen c3. c5, kicking that bishop or asking it to exchange for the knight. On knight takes g4, by the way, this position still black's absolutely fine with a big advantage. But c5, forcing matters. That's bishop takes, rook takes, queen f3. Yeah. Pawns are going basically. Rook takes e4, so this pawn's looked at now. Rook cd1, queen e6, keeping an eye on protecting f7, and also still an eye on g4, and also c4, of course, as well. White plays g5, jettisoning that pawn. If h3, black can afford to play queen takes c4, just holding on to f7 here. So jettisoning the g pawn. Rook d5, g4 now, not minding any check. White plays queen c3. If check, the king just goes to f8 here, it seems. If queen f2, rook e1, black can just exchange things off. So after g4, we have queen c3. And now just rook e5, just sniffing out any dangers. The game ended here. White didn't want to carry this on. If rook takes e5, queen takes, this is just really just easily, it's going to be winning for black. Black's got a massive advantage here in all the end games, as you might expect. So I thought, actually, from my own developmental point of view, maybe you as well, when you look at master games, I think this is like the Kotov effect, what he was going on about that, the way he was playing, but the way we even look at master games, if you don't actually analyze them and the underlying threats behind the scenes, you don't see how concrete and dangerous the pieces actually are. They might look visually attractive. Oh, he just doubled up rooks. Oh, white's pawn structure was compromised. It was a positional win. Actually, behind the scenes, this could have been a number of Tau-style wins behind the scenes. The concrete dark side of this game is quite enormous and unexpected to me, to be honest. I found it absolutely unexpected. I didn't realize there were all these variations until you plunge into it to research this game. So yeah, the concrete forcing nature of chess is the undertone of positions that look good, but actually look good and be effective is like the expression, not just a pretty face, which applies to men and women, by the way, or anyone. So it's not just a pretty face, black's position. It had some teeth to it. So I hope you enjoyed my more philosophical approach to looking at this game. I thought it was of some wider importance here in how we perceive these master games. Okay, comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks very much.